Nintendo 64 is still to this day my personal favorite gaming console ever. For me back then, it was a true game changer in every aspect, and still to this day, affected many games in more ways than any other console has achieved, in my opinion. The funny thing also is that the N64 was the last console that I bought in that generation back then. I owned a Sega Saturn first, my second personal favorite console ever. Then I bought a PlayStation 1, the first console I ever bought out of my own money. And finally, I bought my Nintendo 64, the second console I ever bought out of my own money. I got that bad boy with Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, FCOX, and GoldenEye 64. Honestly, what more could you want? And yes, that was my copy of Ocarina of Time, signed by Miyamoto himself, who I've luckily met twice in my life. First time was when he was just casually walking around the Nintendo booth during ECTS back in, I can't remember what show it was, 2000 or 1999, I can't remember. But I remember Majora's Mask was playable on the event on the show floor, so it was probably around about 2099 or something. And the second time was when he came to the Virgin store in London to promote the release of The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap on the Game Boy Advance. And it's here when I got my copy of Ocarina of Time signed by him with a special gold pen that I bought just for that very occasion.
Oh yeah. Congratulations.
But I don't want to focus on memory lane in this discussion, my personal memory lane in discussion too much. As the title says, I consider the N64 to still be the most game-changing console ever, and I want to explain why I feel this way. And it's also important that you take full note of the title of this video. I say game-changing and not industry-changing. And that's because too much has happened to the games industry overall to firmly place the N64 at the top of all consoles, to have the biggest impact on the industry in total. But there is certainly arguments for it to be the most industry-changing console as well. But for me, it is without a doubt the most game-changing console ever, and it's this element that I want to explain why. When people look back at the N64, they can be quick to point out its flaws, whether it's the use of cartridges instead of CDs, many of the game's frame rates, the blurry textures, or how it supposedly lacked any real third-party support, which is nonsense. But one thing I try to stress to people is that we should never, ever underestimate what this console achieved in both hardware and software. Both components that heavily affected console and software design in the future, many of which still play a large and integral part of gaming today, and arguably many developers still to this day strive to reach the level of greatness that the Nintendo 64 games achieved in with gaming mechanics, many of which that haven't been seen since, which in itself is a crime to gaming. So let's get started, shall we? And there's no better place to start than with the industry and game-changing analog stick. To underestimate what this form of control brought to 3D gaming in consoles is, in my opinion, to be nothing short of ignorant. The N64's analog stick revolutionized how we played games in 3D, which affected how we play games in general, and still play them to this day. Every single game controller since has had analog sticks. It was built out of the need to support a specific game design, something other developers struggled with up till then, and because it was built along with a game, this game being Super Mario 64 of course, and even The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, two games I'll touch upon heavily later. But it didn't just affect how you control the character, but also how it laid the foundations for controls in 3D gaming in all genres. Using the analog stick for the first time is hard to explain. It was nothing short of mind-blowing, absolutely insane how something seemingly so simple could affect the movement of games with so much precision that you felt every single movement with the N64 analog stick. The subtle movements of Mario, something I discussed in one of my first videos, the perfect controls of Wave Race 64, the feel of the snow speeder in Star Wars Shadow of the Empire, the fast and delicate movements of your R-Wing in Star Fox 64. These were precision controls that you had not experienced before on consoles, and the impact of the analog stick changed absolutely everything with 3D games on consoles ever since, arguably even more so than what the D-pad achieved for controlling 2D games on consoles. And the analog stick also brought into the existence, that is the awesomeness of Mario Party and its palm destroying analog stick rotating games. Then we have the Rumble Pack. It's easy to take the Rumble Pack for granted these days, or perhaps not. Thinking back to the outrage that fans made when Sony originally removed it from the PS3 6-axis controller, although there was a lawsuit going on at that time which forced their hand a little. Nintendo are the kings for this though, right? Constantly thinking of ways to engage their fans, not just through their software but also through their hardware, and thanks to them creating the Rumble Pack, shipping it along with the awesomeness that was Star Fox 64, the Rumble Pack, like the analog stick, became an industry standard in a single generation. But Nintendo didn't just use the Rumble Pack for simple feedback on things like explosions or bumping into objects. Although all those things were what made the Rumble Pack so cool, but they also used it more creatively in some of their software, with one example always sticking in my mind from Ocarina of Time, where if you ran over a secret in the ground, the Rumble Pack would vibrate, letting you know something was up, something was there. A bomb blast later and a secret cave was revealed. I absolutely loved this, and Ocarina of Time had many moments like this. For years, once again, the Rumble Pack remained a standard, but also remained pretty generic until Nintendo came along again and changed up the game with HD Rumble, which after using, I don't want normal Rumble ever again. I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, could you imagine playing games without the vibration in your controllers again? I think we all have to salute the awesomeness that is the Rumble Pack and how it's affected our games ever since. Now, this would be a controversial one, I feel. Some people say that Sony started off the second stick revolution on game controllers that allowed gamers to control both their character and camera independently of themselves, which in terms of two analog sticks is technically true, but personally I say that's wrong. The N64 did indeed have only one analog stick, but the controller also had the yellow C buttons, which although only digital, still allowed the gamer to control both the movement and camera independently, in fact not that far off from what PC gamers were used to with mouse and keyboard, which for many is still the preferred way of control for many genres. Using the analog stick and the C buttons allows you to move forwards and backwards and strike from left to right and look up and down. This for consoles was once again revolutionary. Games that initially took advantage of this were Super Mario 64, which allowed camera controls on the C buttons, something I'll get into in a bit. Turok Dinosaur Hunter, which used the C buttons for movement and the analog stick to fully look around in 3D and shoot while still moving. Then you had GoldenEye 64, which had various similar options for movement and camera controls, and even allowed you to use two N64 controllers, where one analog stick could control movement and the other the camera. Which is pretty cool to be fair, but awkward but cool. Yes, you can argue that the second analog stick refined the second control options, the C button options, but I'm telling you, man, the N64 sowed those seeds and was the main influence and templates for those controls going forward on consoles, which, as you know, have now become industry standard once again. And then we have the games. As generations move on and the old get older, there will be few people left at some point who will truly be able to say that they were there when Mario 64 hit the scene, and will have to try and convey the game's megaton impact it had on the industry. Many younger gamers who will be growing up on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch will probably look back at Mario 64 and think, man, what's the fuss? This game looks trash now, and the controls are horrendous, or the level design is dull and boring, etc., etc. It is important, people, that we educate all these poor fools, because Mario 64 is commonly said is the godfather of 3D gaming. That's because it set the standard, the template for all 3D games and a similar nature afterwards. The analog controls of Mario in this game still to this day, I'll argue, squash a vast majority of 3D games we play today. Then you have the open world nature of the game, the level of freedom and the exploration that simply didn't exist on consoles before, and that has been the template for countless games afterwards, even for Mario games. To name just 3D platformers, you got Banjo-Kazooie, Rayman, Donkey Kong, Sonic, Spyro the Dragon, Ape Escape, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, Conker, etc., etc. You name it, and Mario 64 was probably behind it. The free camera, although basic by today's standards, let's say basic, it still works. Although basic by today's standards, should once again not be underestimated in what it achieved for 3D games at that time. Mario 64 deserves all the praise it gets, and that praise should never end. It was a game whose engine was also developed along with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And speaking of Ocarina of Time, there are reasons why some games remain in the top 10 best games ever made, even decades after their release. What Ocarina of Time done for open world gaming on consoles is once again the foundation for most games we play in similar genres on consoles. From this point on, games could only get bigger and more detailed because Ocarina of Time nailed the base formula upon release, much like Mario 64 did. Nintendo once again showing everyone how to bring their once 2D games successfully into 3D, something many companies struggled to do and still struggle to do today. Ocarina of Time's Hyrule felt epic in scale. It's hard to convey how vast this world felt back then, because once again you need to get into the mindset that we had not experienced anything like this before on consoles. I guess it's the early 3D equivalent of perhaps what Breath of the Wild has given us now, that level of shock and awe as you step out onto Hyrule Field, can see as far as the eye can see, watch the sun set as the shadows change position, visit towns at different times of night, which the real-time world clock achieved. I'm telling you, people, don't ever mock the first 3D consoles and games, because they created that original magic that hasn't been beaten since. Then we have the industry-changing Z targeting, which was in Ocarina of Time. A lock-on system that played an incredible role in the combat and 3D controls of Ocarina of Time, and has for many games been the standard since. Even games as recent as Dark Souls 3 still use the lock-on methods that Ocarina of Time created. Game-changing, like I said. And finally, I want to talk about multiplayer split screen, because in my eyes, the N64 was the first true console to incorporate 4-player split screen gaming with the likes of Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye 64, Star Fox 64, to name a few, all of which affected the console industry greatly. People still talk about GoldenEye 64 multiplayer today, and you have to wonder where games like Halo and Call of Duty might have been in terms of multiplayer on consoles if the N64 didn't include 4 controller ports and elevated 4-player split-screen console gaming in the home, powered off one incredible console. Before then, we had multiplayer console games, of course, but most had all players sharing a single screen, or there were the odd few games that had 2-player split screen. But the N64, with no additional peripherals like multi-taps, put multiplayer at the forefront as one of its unique qualities, and we are all thankful for it. The N64 still to this day, is my personal favorite console. Like I said, it came out in an era of pure magic, and because of this console, the way we play video games was forever changed, both in hardware and gameplay innovation. For me, the N64 still does things better than even modern consoles, especially in many gameplay mechanics. It was a console that revolutionized 3D gaming, also for me greatly expanding on console surround sound, especially in games like Rogue Squadron and Jet Force Gemini. That's used the surround sound for gameplay purposes, with bullets flying past you, explosions behind you, letting you know which direction enemies were coming in, and everything like this. It was absolutely phenomenal for the time. It's industry changing analog stick, rumble pack, multiplayer ports, 3D worlds, gameplay mechanics within these games, industry setting templates in many areas still to this day leaves me stating that the N64 is still the most game changing console ever, and the games and consoles we play today owe more to what this machine achieved and introduced than any other console I can think of. And if you missed out on this console, you can either go back, put your head into 90s mode and appreciate the greatness that is the N64, or you can look back at this console and think it's trash. Then my friends, you are simply
Wrong.
As always, thanks for listening. I really wanted to do this video for a long time. I absolutely love the N64. Whether you agree with me or not, let me know your comments below, or let's just talk about the N64 in general, which, like I said, is an awesome console with some absolutely sensational games. Once again, thanks for listening, everyone. Peace.